October 30th, 1974. Kinshasa, Zaire. 60,000 people scream inside a stadium built from stolen money. Muhammad Ali just knocked George Foreman into the canvas, and the world is calling it the greatest sporting upset in history. Cameras flash. Commentators weep with joy. But 3 miles away, in the basement of a building nobody photographs, men are still screaming too. Not from joy. The same week the world fell in love with the rumble in the jungle. A dictator was burying the evidence of what he did to make it happen. This wasn't sport. This wasn't celebration. This was the most expensive magic trick in African history. And the price was paid in a currency nobody in Madison Square Garden ever thought to ask about. To understand how a boxing match became a murder weapon, you have to go back to the man who bought the fight before either boxer ever threw a punch. By 1974, Mobutu Sese Seko had ruled Zaire for 9 years. He'd renamed the country. He'd renamed himself. He'd built a personality cult so total that Zairean television opened every broadcast with an image of his face descending through the clouds like a god. But underneath the leopard-skin hat and the ivory-topped cane, Mobutu had a problem money couldn't quite solve and terror couldn't quite hide. The economy was collapsing. His Zaireanization policy, seizing foreign-owned businesses and handing them to loyal cronies who had no idea how to run them, had gutted the country's industry in under 2 years. Copper prices, the backbone of Zaire's export economy, were crashing on world markets. Inflation was eating what was left of people's wages. In the capital, lines for basic goods stretched for blocks while Mobutu's private jet sat fueled and ready at Njili Airport, always ready for another shopping trip to Paris. And worse than the economy was the perception. The world was starting to ask questions. Journalists who'd once called him a stabilizing force in Central Africa were now using words like kleptocracy. Aid organizations were quietly slowing the flow of money. Mobutu needed something enormous, something that would make the entire planet look at Zaire and see strength, modernity, glory, not what was actually happening in the villages 200 miles outside Kinshasa. He needed a magic trick. And in early 1974, an American promoter named Don King walked into his orbit with exactly the kind of trick a desperate dictator was looking for. Don King didn't have $10 million. Nobody in boxing had ever paid that kind of money for a single fight, let alone 2 purses of $5 million each. Astronomical by 1974 standards, more than double what any heavyweight had ever earned in one night. King needed a backer insane enough, or desperate enough, to put up cash no sane investor would risk. Mobutu said yes before King finished the pitch. Here's the part the highlight reels never show you. That $10 million wasn't found in some national surplus. It came directly from Zaire's state treasury, a treasury already drowning in foreign debt, a treasury that couldn't reliably pay teachers in the provinces, a treasury propping up an economy that was, by every honest metric, in free fall. Mobutu didn't see it as an expense. He saw it as the cheapest advertising campaign in modern history. For $10 million, he was about to buy something propaganda couldn't manufacture on its own. The undivided attention of the entire planet, broadcast live, with his name stitched into every headline. Foreman versus Ali, from Kinshasa, Zaire. That phrase alone, repeated by every sports anchor on earth for months, was worth more to Mobutu than any embassy could ever produce. He wasn't funding a fight. He was funding the single largest piece of brandwashing the continent had ever seen. And he understood that better than the men who put on the gloves. But there was a problem standing between Mobutu and his perfect spectacle. The fighters needed a reason to actually show up. Foreman didn't want to go to Africa for a routine title defense. Ali, ever the showman, needed a story bigger than a boxing match. So Mobutu's regime did what regimes built on theater always do. They didn't just host the fight. They staged Africa itself, repainting Kinshasa's surface, just enough to photograph well, while the rot underneath stayed exactly where it was. Stade du 20 Mai, the stadium where Ali would dethrone Foreman, wasn't just a sports venue. It carried Mobutu's fingerprints in the most literal sense. It had been used for political rallies, for declarations of loyalty to the regime, for the kind of mass spectacle a one-party state depends on to remind its citizens who's in charge. And according to multiple journalist and historian accounts from the period, that same stadium complex held detention areas used by Mobutu's security forces. While construction crews rushed to finish renovations for the International Press Corps descending on Kinshasa, men accused of plotting against the regime, Men suspected of disloyalty, men who simply knew the wrong people, were being held and interrogated within walking distance of where Ali would later dance around Foreman's jab. This is the detail the highlight reels never mention. The same month the world's cameras arrived to film a celebration of African pride and athletic glory, Mobutu's secret police were using the international spotlight as cover. Foreign journalists who might otherwise have gone digging into the regime's human rights record were busy writing about training camps, sparring sessions, and Ali's poetry. The fight wasn't just a distraction from the economy, it was a distraction from everything. Pattern interrupt, because here's where the story gets darker than most retellings dare to go. There's a reason the fight got delayed 5 weeks. The official story is a cut above Foreman's eye during training. That part's true, but the 5-week delay did something else too. It gave Mobutu's regime 5 extra weeks of total global media attention focused entirely on Zaire, an unplanned bonus propaganda window he hadn't even budgeted for. More on what he did with that window in a moment. Muhammad Ali, ever attuned to the optics of power, leaned into Mobutu's Africa with open arms. He told the press he felt like he was coming home. He spoke about Pan-African pride, about a black champion fighting on black soil for the first time in heavyweight history. It was a genuinely powerful narrative, and it was also, whether Ali fully grasped it or not, exactly the narrative Mobutu needed broadcast to the world. Every time Ali praised Zaire on camera, he was, unintentionally, laundering the regime's image for free. Foreman, by contrast, kept his distance from politics entirely, arriving with his pet German shepherd, a breed associated in the eyes of locals with the Belgian colonial police who'd once used the same dogs to terrorize Congolese citizens. The crowd's hostility toward Foreman wasn't really about boxing. It was about history reading itself onto a foreign fighter who didn't understand the symbols he was carrying. Neither boxer was working for Mobutu. Neither boxer, by most accounts, fully understood the scale of what they were standing inside of. They were the talent. The dictator was the architect. And the difference between those two roles is the entire story the world chose not to tell. October 30th, 1974. 4 a.m. local time, scheduled that way specifically so American audiences could watch live during prime time. 60,000 people packed into Stade du 20 Mai, chanting, Ali Bomai. Ali, kill him. 8 rounds later, Ali leaned back against the ropes one final time, let Foreman exhaust himself swinging at air and shoulder, and then dropped him with a 5-punch combination that ended the fight and rewrote boxing history in real time. The world erupted. Newspapers from Tokyo to London ran front-page photos of Ali standing over Foreman. Sports writers called it the greatest upset of the 20th century. And for one shining week, Zaire wasn't a word associated with debt default or political prisoners. It was associated with miracle. Mobutu got exactly what he paid for. But while the foreign press packed their cameras and flew home with their incredible story, the machinery that had made Kinshasa presentable for the cameras didn't simply switch off. According to multiple historical accounts of the period, individuals detained in the lead-up to the fight, to ensure no disruption, no protest, no embarrassing incident during the biggest week of international attention Zaire had ever received, were not simply released once the cameras left. Some accounts describe detainees held well beyond the fight's conclusion, their cases never making it into any sports retrospective, because no sports retrospective was ever looking for them. This is the open loop the channel promised you at the start, now closed. The fight didn't happen instead of repression. The fight happened as repression's perfect camouflage. While the world watched 8 rounds of athletic brilliance, the regime conducted its business in the dark, confident that nobody filming a heavyweight title fight was going to ask what was happening 3 miles away. Here's the part that should make your stomach turn. The $10 million Mobutu spent didn't come from some hidden surplus skimmed off corruption that would have existed anyway. It came at the direct expense of a state budget that was already failing its own people. In the years immediately following the fight, Zaire's economic situation didn't improve. It deteriorated further. Inflation accelerated. Public services that were already inadequate grew worse. The very Zaireanization policy that had crashed the economy in the first place remained in effect, because reversing it would have meant admitting failure, and admitting failure was never something Mobutu's regime did. The fight bought Mobutu something real. Legitimacy, headlines, a seat at the table of nations that mattered. Foreign leaders who'd been hesitant to deal openly with an accused kleptocrat suddenly had cover. He hosted the Rumble in the Jungle, became shorthand for He's a serious player, and serious players got loans, got handshakes, got photographs with American presidents. The propaganda investment paid dividends for years, just never to the people whose treasury had funded it. That's the actual exchange rate of the rumble in the jungle. $10 million and an unknown number of quietly disappeared political prisoners, converted into roughly 15 more years of survivable rule for a man whose economic policies had already doomed his country to decades of poverty. The footage from October 30th, 1974, still gets replayed every year. Documentaries call it one of the most electrifying nights in sports history. And it was. Ali's performance that night belongs in any honest conversation about athletic greatness. None of that is the lie. The lie is the silence around what made the night possible. The lie is 60,000 voices chanting in a stadium built partly to hide the men who couldn't chant at all. The lie is a dictator who understood with chilling precision that the fastest way to make the world stop asking hard questions about your country is to give it something so dazzling it forgets the questions existed in the first place. Mobutu didn't fund a boxing match. He funded an alibi. And for one night in Kinshasa, it worked perfectly, because nobody watching was looking for the bodies the spotlight was built to hide.